Thomas, how are you?
Good. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I missed you at the AWFS this year.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. It was a great event. Very good
Yeah,
event.
I heard that overall the event was really, really good. People came back very inspired and enthused by things there.
Yeah, yeah. The nice thing about AWFS is very education focused. So not only are you seeing the new technologies, the new practices, but you get a lot of good information, whether it be workforce development, cultural generations, things like that. You get that information to take away with you too, which is a really, really good thing.
Yeah, when you look at these kinds of events, there's a thousand reasons not to go. There's oh,
Yes,
you're too busy, it's too much,
for
that I
sure.
don't like that city. But the reasons to go are small but powerful. And it's the
Yeah.
conversation that you have in the elevator or while waiting in line with somebody else in the industry that's got the most value.
For sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's even you get exposed to like 10,000 things, right? And if you can take away five of them and implement three, to me, that's a win. I mean, you're
Yeah.
continually improving and making progress, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Now, you were one of the featured speakers at the AWFS.
Correct. Yep.
That's how I heard
So
about you.
yeah, yeah, I was fortunate enough to speak the inaugural year of what they're calling WED Talks. So they're short 30-minute presentations talking about high pressing issues or trends in the woodworking industry.
Right. Wonderful. WED Talks.
WED Talks, yeah.
Yeah, that's a play on the TED Talk thing.
Yeah, a little bit. Wood education
Wood
is what it
education.
stands for.
Yeah, I did a TED Talk
Yeah,
about a year and a half ago now.
yeah, yeah. I've actually it's a great session actually. I watched it this week, either earlier this
Oh,
week or the week before.
thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
thanks. Yeah. So let's talk about what we've got you on here for, because what I wanted you to do was recreate what you spoke about at the AWFS for people who hadn't seen it. And you talked about generational collaboration. That's a big, beefy word. So before we get into that, can you tell us, because the listeners on this call are all in the finished wood trades industry and they're owners of those businesses, who's
Yep.
Thomas Allot, and why were you speaking about generational collaboration?
Collaboration. It's
Yeah,
a tongue twister to
it
even
is.
say.
It is.
So again, my name is Thomas Allott. I am the manager of Stiles University. We are an in-house accredited university within Stiles Machinery. We're based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, but have regional offices all across North America. But what Stiles University is here for is to take your technicians, your operators, your maintenance personnel, and train them from cutting a sandwich yesterday at Jimmy John's all the way up to operating a 5-axis CNC when they're ready to go.
Mm.
I am extremely passionate about the cultural workforce, the skills gap, and one thing that is really close to heart is the generational, I call it collaboration rather than separation. And this will lead us into a better topic in a little bit, but
Yeah.
I like to call it collaboration because that's really what's at the root of everything is we need to start working together instead of chopping each other's generations and pointing fingers.
Haven't we been doing that for a long time though? I mean, right now the lightning rod is millennials, but the people
Yep.
listening were hippies at one point, and weren't the hippies the problem?
Yeah, no, hey, everyone's always a problem. If anyone's different than us, if they're born in a different time, they're the problem, right? They need to change, not us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't want to take away your whole presentation. You actually
Yeah,
broke this down into some really interesting parts
correct.
that helps people understand it. I think there's 5 parts.
6 parts, but yeah, yep, six
6.
different parts. Yeah, there's six different parts. And if you don't mind, I'll just kind of start breaking them through and talking about them. We can go into
Yeah.
depth as we want, but talking a little bit about identification first and what we do just instinctively by identifying each other by when we're born,
Mm.
right? They're a boomer, they're an Xer, they're a millennial, or they're a Z or alpha is the new generation coming up.
Oh, is
We've
it?
been really, yeah, Z is, they're starting over at alpha, which is kind of scary. But with the identification process, what we've been doing is you can Google generational differences, right? And you'll see 10 different versions of the definitions of what a boomer is, or what a millennial is, or what an Xer is. And so what I do is try to talk about them literally holistically. I go through and explain all the identifications based on the Pew Research Center. Are you familiar with the Pew Research Center?
Actually. They put out great research.
Yeah, fantastic research. So I use their standard, which is that a boomer is from 46 to 64, an Xer is from 65 to 80, sorry. A millennial or a Gen Y is from 81 to 96, and then a Gen Z or an Alpha is from 97 to 2012. And so why I do that is just, we need to have a benchmark, right? We need to have a year's benchmark to see what we're working with. And for the first time in modern history, we've got 4 different generations working in the US workforce, the labor pool, which is incredible. I mean, that's a good thing to say that we've got a strong labor pool, but it's very tricky now because you've got people that were born in the 40s and people that were born in the 2000s now working together.
Yeah.
And so we have to find that bridge. So
I spoke to a company. I mean, lots of companies have 2 generations where it's and it's typically men in this industry, although increasingly women. So I apologize to anybody who's listening if I didn't capture you in that. But this company I was speaking to a little while ago, grandfather, father, and son, or grandson, if you will. So 3 generations in one company.
Yeah.
You know?
And so with these generations, right, we like to throw labels at them just by the year span that they were born into. So it could be millennials, they're obsessed with technology, but they're lazy. Boomers, they work too slow, but they remember everything, right? We classify people by when they're born instead of what they've gone through. So one of the main topics that I like to talk about is impact, right? And I break impact down into 3 different categories. You've got life impacts, you've got technology impacts, and then you've got information impacts. And I'll break those down a little bit more is that the life impact is what events have happened during your lifespan, right? So if you're born in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you're very prompt to war times, and you most likely went into the service as soon as you graduated high school. And then when you came back from the service, you didn't really have time to go to college, right? You had to go straight into the industry. And so you learn trade skills, right? You didn't have time to go get a business degree. You learn trade skills, and then you learn the business side on the back end. That's why we had such a strong skills trade group of people in that era, right? Is because they had to be. Where you fast forward into the early 90s, you start experiencing the big college boom. You need to go to college. You need to go to college. You need to go to college. So that's shrinking our skills gap or our skills pool a little bit more because now people aren't forced to go into the skilled trades. They're choosing to go to college instead of into the trades. But another thing that could impact a life is look at the global market as we're talking right now. Yeah. Whether it be terrorism, whether it be travel, however it is. You go to a sports game, you go through security. You go to an airport, you can't walk your loved ones to the gate anymore. You drop them off at the front door because you have to go through security. So the millennials, that's what they've grown up with, right? The millennials and the alphas, they've never known any different. They didn't know that you used to be able to walk your loved ones to the gates when dropping them off at the airport. Yeah. So their impacts in the life moments have really changed the way that someone experiences life at this point, right? The other one is technology, and this one's a pretty easy one. I don't usually spend too much time because this one resonates with people pretty fast, right? You go back to the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, when the first computers are starting to come around and the massive room-sized computers, right? Yeah. Yeah. And so the boomers are still learning the new technology. The Xers are getting used to it because they're in that same era. The millennials have picked up on what a stationary computer is, but now the mobile computer or the laptop starts to come out and you can work anywhere you want. And now the alphas, they've got wearable devices like this. They've got glasses.
Self-identification, Thomas.
Exactly, right?
You just pointed to your watch, yeah. Is that an iPhone iWatch?
No, this is actually a Garmin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a Garmin. But yeah, so, I mean, different generations have grown up with those different types of technology, which have really impacted the way that they work in the business place. You and I both have laptops. We both have smartphones. You're working from your home. I'm working from an office. We're getting the same amount done, right? You don't have to be in an office to do your job. I don't have to be in an office to do my job, right? But because that's allowed us with the mobile technology.
Right.
The last one I think is the most important one, and that's the informational impact. Because go back to, let's see, probably late 80s, early 90s, you really had 3 sources of information, maybe 4. You had your news outlets, so whether that be a radio, your TV, or your papers.
Yeah.
You had a library where you could go read books that might be 20 to 30 years old. Or you could go to a college and find college literacy papers the professors have written that might be a bit more current. The last one, you had word of mouth. You and I could have an argument about who had more information or who had the right information. And the only way to fact check that would be to go to the other 3 sources to see who was actually right.
Yeah.
You fast forward and we start coming up with when 1995, when Google came around, or if you remember AskJeeves.com.
I do, yeah.
Right? So you ask Jeeves, what temperature does salmon need to be cooked at? And it pulls up 5 different, this is what temperature. And so with Google, it allowed anyone to publish information online. You no longer had to be an author or a scholar to publish information. Well, then after Google came the Facebook and the social network movement, if you will. So MySpace came out, Facebook and Twitter and all those. And now anybody who's anybody can publish information online, whether it's true or not.
Mm-hmm.
And today we're into what I like to call the influencer movement. So not only do we have professionals publishing information and people publishing information, whether it be right or wrong, but now we have business professionals who are becoming influencers to influence the information that you're receiving.
Right.
Right.
And Thomas, how does that show up at the machine? You know, like you work at Stiles and you've got somebody on a CNC. How does that show up at work or in the workplace?
Well, so now no longer do we have to be able to memorize things, right? For example, if I need to learn how to do something on a machine or at a machine, I can do a Google search, right?
Right.
I can find the information, and whether it be a user-generated content or it be a professional-generated content, like from Stiles or someone like that, an operator or maintenance personnel is regularly finding information as fast as they need it, where before you had to search for it or wait for the content to come from the supplier, so forth and so on.
Right.
So, and the even scarier thing now is we're starting to get into a little bit of AI, right? Artificial intelligence, where I've got a smart home, and I know that you're a pretty techie guy. I don't know if you've got any Google Homes or Amazon Alexas at home.
I actually refuse to have it in the house, but maybe that's an indication of how old I am.
So, but the interesting thing is we're now trusting one source. Hey, Google, what is this? Hey, Amazon, what is this?
Yeah.
Or tell me this, right? So we're going back all the way almost back to the early or late 80s and before, where we're getting that single source of information. So that is really affecting how the generations are acting within the business place, because what they've been exposed to when they're growing up.
Yeah. So that's the identification phase. All of that is just recognizing these different people at different phases.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And so by us not doing this, what it's doing is creating that generational separation, right? And so with that, you're having a drop in productivity because people aren't willing to work with each other.
Mm.
You've got a drop in ingenuity because people aren't working with each other. They're hiding their thoughts and their ideas because they think that someone might steal it because they don't trust each other. The biggest one in our industry right now is hiring and retaining employees, right? Because we're not changing our mindsets and not changing our places of business to adapt to these different types of personalities, we're scaring away great potential talent.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing. So it's causing a lot of issues within that we don't even realize at this point, because it's all mental at this, right? And so we have to look and start opening our minds up a little bit in order to allow these different types of people to come in and make influence into our businesses.
Yeah. I mean, we really need to. Right now, though, there's a labor shortage. And even in cities where there's lots of available labor, it's hard to get skilled labor. How do I use this kind of identification tool to change the way I'm looking for people or open myself up as a business owner to hiring I don't actually care what generation they're from as long as they're able to do the job. But I want to make sure that they fit in the production facility.
So it's an analogy that I love to use for this. Do you remember using when you're a kid, or maybe when your kids were growing up, you had those block boxes where you had to put a square inside a square hole and a circle inside a square hole, right? So what would have happened if you tried to put a square inside a circle hole?
Well, it didn't work.
Didn't work, but it was still a strong peg, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a weak peg. It was just the wrong shape. And so what if we flip that process and put it into a business process, and where the holes are the business processes themselves and the pegs are the employees, right? I've got a good, strong employee. They just might not fit into that certain process. So can I adapt that process to make sure that I can utilize the talents that employee might have to benefit my company? So maybe I need to change that square peg into a round peg in order to fit that process and that employee together. Because I've got a good foundation, right? That peg is strong. It just doesn't quite fit into the square because it's a circle, right?
Right.
So it's not only looking at, hey, this person doesn't fit my current process. Maybe it's looking at our processes and saying this process doesn't fit the type of person that I'm bringing in. Can I change the process in order to engage more of my employees?
Okay. Well, I want to hear the rest of these points that you've got too. So we've got identification.
Yep.
What's the next one?
We've identified a little bit, and we've gone through and we've been individualized, right? We've talked about how right now we're putting labels on everyone. We've talked about how that's causing separation because we're labeling everyone and putting everyone into silos. We've talked a little bit about the impact that we've had based on life events, technology events, and also our information events. But what I think is really important is that we start to work together. And so how we do this is by learning who you are and who I am. So things like the strengths assessments, right? We always say that we're working on our weaknesses because that's the weakest point of us. But what if we start to learn what our strengths are and what our other colleagues' strengths are? So that when we're working together, I can look and say, look, I need to know that I can go to Dominic for this because this is a strong asset of his and it's not so strong of mine.
Sure. Right?
But one way that we need to learn how to do that is what I call exchanging currencies. And I'm not talking about money, right? We're all talking, when we talk currency, we talk money. When I talk about currency, I like to talk about information. So how am I giving you information? Right. How do I like to receive information? So me personally, I like short and sweet. I like a short email with the important bullet points in it and a task to do, and then I'm going to go do my thing.
Yeah.
Where I've got employees that like full emails, 2 paragraphs long with all the details and all the communication, right? But then that's what the tool or the currency that they need in order to do their job. So by starting to understand each other's currencies and how we like to deliver and receive information, when we get that email from Becky in accounting, we're not going, what is Becky talking about, right? Why is she being so rude in her email? That might not be her trying to be rude. That's just her communication style or her currency style.
Right. So, the thing I keep thinking of, and I know I keep bringing it down to the machine level, but when I've got somebody in front of the saw or I've got somebody in front of another machine, there's
for sure.
Quite often there's nothing there for instructions. Let's say it's just changing the tool head on the CNC. And somebody who's been around for a long time will realize it gets stuck when it gets dusty. And they just take a hammer, flip it around, use the handle, and just tap it and take it off. Somebody who doesn't know that needs a sheet written down that says, if the chuck is stuck, if the tool is stuck, try these 3 things. And then are you saying a millennial might need a QR code that they scan with their phone that shows them a video of the same thing?
It could be. It all depends on what the type of millennial you're talking about, right? So you could have a millennial with a lot of experience. You could have a millennial with no experience. You could have a boomer that might need the QR code, and you could have a boomer that has 40 years of experience that they don't need anything. They just know it up in their head. It kind of circles back to that quote, right? So when is common sense not so common? Right? And how do you define common sense? Because someone else has common sense to flip that hammer over and tink it. to get rid of the dust might not have that for the next person.
Right.
So, but that brings up a really good point. One of the other takeaways that I like to give to the audience members is you need to set up those cross-generational mentorships, right?
Mm-hmm.
So take your seniored, because they could only be there for 10 years and they could be a Gen Xer, and take your newer employees and they could be there for 2 years and they could be a boomer, but put them together, right? And have them cross-mentor each other. One, the newer person could bring in different business processes where the person that's been there for 10 years for a while is going to bring in a lot of company history. Right. So back to your point on the CNC, we'll say, hey, this saw right here, when you start to run it, what happens is it builds up dust, and this is why. Mm-hmm. And the newer employee might say, well, why don't you put a guard up, right? Or why don't you get air blow on it, right? And so you start to get that cross collaboration together, which really starts to improve business processes.
Yeah. I think, automatically I think of, and this happens, I think, a lot, how I was raised at my kitchen table. So my dad, great guy, journeyman welding fabricator, English skills, not so good. Technical skills, fantastic. Also happened to be proud of the fact that he fired apprentices on a regular basis. And his boss would come down and say, Joe, you're actually not allowed to fire people. And he would yell in multiple languages. But I see that in my head and I think, how do we take these guys that are skilled? It's not necessarily an Italian guy or Croatian guy or a guy that came over from England or Ireland, but they know how to run that machine really well intuitively because they've done it, but they may not be great communicators. You and I are communicators. It's easy for us to talk about this, but how do we take a guy like that who's really technically skilled and get them to change or make their information available so that a newer person, doesn't matter what generation, can pick it up? Because at some point we've got to take that info and we've got to move it over to newer generation. People are retiring. The boomers are retiring. We could talk about it any way we want. They could stay along working longer, but we're just postponing the inevitable. So
for sure.
I start to think then about what are some things I could do to take that info from the older people, just call them older, and give them to the younger or newer to the industry people.
Yeah. So on top of the cross-generational mentorship programs, the thing that I found success with, so my team is made up of boomers, made up of Xers, millennials. We have an alpha now. And so what we do every single year is we take a couple days out and we go off site. And we either go, last year we did a high ropes course. This year we did some go-kart driving. And it sounds fun, right? But the thing that does, it builds trust. And so I'll send this video clip to you. It's brilliant the way that it naturally progressed. Is one of our newer employees, who is a millennial, he had we were at the high ropes course and he had just been with the department for about 2 months maybe, and he fell. So he's hanging, imagine this, he's hanging 40 feet up in the air, upside down. He's scared, right? He's panicking. He's like, how am I going to get up? One of my other instructors, he's been here for 21 years. So he's been here almost his whole entire career. He's 2 stations up. He finds his way, maneuvers his way back 2 stations, picks up the newer employee, helps him get up onto the platform. His mindset goes from scared, right, to super relieved and super happy. Yeah. And now he knows that he has the trust in his other counter employee, right, to work with him. And so you've broken down that barrier that's of the trust of he's going to take my job or he's trying to manipulate me, right? Because you can reflect back on those really good times or those positive times to say, hey, I know that John he's doing this out of malice, right? John's actually just doing this to try and get his job done. And so I need to work with John a little bit better to make sure that we're moving things forward. Right. So taking your team off site is one of the biggest tools that I use in order to get those people to work together, because you build trust outside of the 4 walls of your business at that point.
Yeah, those little things do matter. And people listening might be thinking, listen, labor's tight. We're running on the margins. We're just barely getting by. Taking them off site is tough. But Thomas, I think what you're saying is find a way to get people interacting more. So it could be barbecue on Friday. This week, I went for a tour to something called O2E Brands, which is
Okay.
The franchise brand that runs 1-800-GOT-JUNK, Wow 1-800 One Day Paint, Shack Shine, and a couple of other ones. And I took a trades company there on a visit to see what was going on. And we were talking about how to do what they do, but in our own shop. Well, our shop, or the shop of my client, is just different.
Yeah.
It's just a different place. And one of the things they do at O2E Brands is they buy everybody the first round of the weekend. So that's one beer or one wine, just one. But that works for their culture. So what are you doing at your manufacturing facility, at your company? It doesn't have to be alcohol, obviously, but it could be a barbecue that everybody looks forward to once a month, where it's just casual, and you do invest that half hour at the end of the day. It does cost you money, but the pickup, the impact is what you're looking for as a leader. You want that. You want everybody. You want those gears tightly meshing, not jiggling around, right?
For sure. So a couple of things. A lot of it's on flexibility, to be honest. As I go back to the blocks example that I gave you, is making sure that we can make the processes fit the people rather than the people have to fit the processes. And so some people might have kids, right? And so they might need to come in a little bit later and stay a little bit later, or might have to come in super early and leave a little bit later. But as long as they're getting their job done and meeting the requirements of the business, we're okay with that. We'll be flexible around that. A good example is with our manufacturing for the CNCs just down the road. We do half days on Friday. So they're allowed to work a longer shift during the week in order for them to get out early on Friday to enjoy the summer hours. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Michigan weather, but the summer is
There's
like
only
sacred.
2 seasons. There's snowing and melting.
Yes, there is. Exactly. Or construction. We consider that a season too.
Yeah.
But summer is very sacred to a lot of people, especially people love to go up north in Michigan, right? And so by allowing them to get out early in the manufacturing environment and spend time with their families and get that head start to beat the traffic to go up north, it makes a huge impact, right? They enjoy their weekend, they come home, they're ready to go to work on Monday at that point.
Yeah.
So it's little things like that we're starting to do. Wearing jeans to work instead of having to wear business attire in the offices has made a huge impact for people, because our work-life balance, I don't consider it a balance anymore. It's more of a mesh.
Yeah.
Right? You're working at 10 o'clock at night. You're working at 6 a.m. in the morning. It just has to blend. So making people comfortable within their environments is a huge step.
Yeah. And a lot of this, in a manufacturing facility, I keep talking about the floor, but you're right. There's an office as well.
Yeah.
And all of, we're all, a business is a collection of systems run by great people designed to make a profit.
Yes, 100%. And the biggest thing that we've done is we had an older style building that we're in right now, traditionally brick, right? So very old style and high walls, single offices. We actually tore all those down and made a collaborational area. So there's only a few people that have offices within the work environment, and that's not to put people in silos. It's to make sure that, hey, I know that I can just reach over the desk and say, hey, can you help me with this project real quick? The amount of production that's increased and the energy in the office is more than worth the investment.
Neat. That's great. Well, we've got item number 1 was identification. Item 2 was
individualization.
Yeah, individualization. I know we've got some other points to get through. Maybe we should list what those points are and briefly touch on them. I don't want the podcast to go too long because people listen to this just while they're walking their dog or something. And I know you've got to get back to work, but what are the other 4 points?
Well, so we've gone through identification. We've gone through individualization.
Yep.
We've gone through impact. We've gone through separation. We've talked about some ideas about collaboration, right? Yep. So getting out of the office and doing things like that. The biggest thing, to be honest with you, Dominic, is that execution point, right? Is making sure that we're taking the things that we're practicing and that we're talking about all the time and making sure that we execute them into the business. The biggest and the number one thing that people want is listening. And I know it sounds silly because it's such an easy thing to do, but people want to be heard, but they want you to actually listen and interpret their information and then execute and act on it.
Right.
Things as simple as asking someone, hey, how's it going at home, right? Is everything going okay at home? I know you've been kind of slowing down a little bit at work, but is there anything that I can do to help you? And allow them to give you that information for you to be a sounding board, because then you can take that information and make whatever changes necessary to make sure that you can execute, to make sure that their work progress or work performance is improving, and overall as a business you're growing.
Yeah, listening to them. I think, one of the challenges that people listening to this might have is that, I listen to my guys, but if I listen, they're just going to complain. And there's something that I teach through the coaching that I do, and we talk about it. When you talk to business owners, successful business owners, they sound a certain way. And you've probably noticed this as well. When you talk to somebody who's not successful, they sound a certain way too. They place a lot of blame. They make excuses. They're in denial. They're negative all the time. If I, as a business owner, talk like that, I'm going to create that kind of culture. So when I do your step here about listening to people, if I'm always being negative, I can expect to hear negativity back because I've set the standard. Right?
Yeah.
If I'm always proactive and taking initiative, and if I'm a positive thinker and I speak positively, then my team is going to learn, hey, that's the only way Dom's going to respond. They're going to start to respond that way as well. That's what we hope.
100%.
Yeah.
And it does come down to a lot of the energy, if you will, that you put off is the energy you're going to receive back. Yeah. So if you're a closed door policy type of person and you have to have meetings set up and you don't just allow people to come in, then they're just going to be that way with you, right? It's a very standoffish meeting at that point because it has to be set. But if you keep your door wide open and engage with your employees, no matter what generation they're from, that relationship's going to start growing and they're going to feel a lot more comfortable in the work environment. And then you're going to start, again, growing and progressing together.
Yeah. It's a really old-fashioned thing, but it's a great point, Thomas, for us to remind each other. How many of you listening start your day off by walking through the shop floor before you go into your office?
Yeah.
Just a walk around to say, Steve, how you doing? How's Brenda? Whatever their spouse's name, because you're going to know it, right?
For sure.
There's George. Hey, George, how you doing? I saw you, your truck is out there. Just chatting to everybody as you go through. That changes the culture of your business by doing that. It takes minutes. It doesn't take a lot of time. And yes, you're busy as the owner. Yes, you've got estimates, you've got payroll, you've got all that stuff. But the more you do that, the more you open up that communication that you're talking about. It's just, it makes it easier for you to see things and for them to talk to you.
Yeah, it's putting that personality into the workplace. I know we sometimes like to separate home from work, but you have to blend it a little bit. So when you're sitting in that meeting, right, maybe it's a production meeting and everyone's waiting for the last two people to show up and everyone's just on their phones, looking at their emails. Put that phone down and reach across the table and say, John, how's it going? I know your mom's sick. Is everything okay with her? Is she getting any better? Because that's how you build relationships, right? And that's how you grow as a company. You have to make sure those relationships stay tight.
Well, this has been fantastic. Hey, one of the things that we talked about when we were setting this call up, you had a really cool story about the razor versus the axe.
So,
do you want to share that?
Yeah, for sure. It's an old, I believe it's an Asian proverb or something like that. And it goes a little bit like this. And I asked the audience, or I'll ask you, we'll use an example. So Dominic, if I were to offer you a razor blade or an axe, which one would you choose?
Well, it depends on what I need to do.
Depends what you do. So half the audience usually raises their hand for the axe. Half the audience usually raises their hand for the razor blade. And the real answer is exactly what you just said. It depends what it's for. Because an axe is strong, but cannot shave a face. A razor blade is sharp, but cannot cut down a tree. Each tool is meant for a specific person or a specific purpose,
right,
and a specific process. So never look down on anyone unless you're admiring their shoes.
Never look down on anyone unless you're admiring their shoes.
Unless you're admiring their shoes.
Right. So everybody's got their own, the story of that is everybody's got their own strengths.
For sure. Yep.
Right?
Yep, for sure.
I love it. I wanted to make sure we got that story in here because the people listening will be trying to tell that story tomorrow at some point. They'll be like, I heard this great thing. Yeah. Awesome. Hey, Thomas, if somebody wants to get in touch with you or perhaps they want you as a speaker at one of their events, how do they find you?
Yeah, as always, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just search Thomas Allot under Stiles Machinery. You can find me there. If you want to add me on Instagram, I'm okay with that as well. I'm a huge outdoor enthusiast, so you'll see a lot of pictures of my mountain bikes and my hiking. And I'm at T_J_Allot on Instagram as well. So feel free to reach out with any questions, or I'm open to any speaking engagements as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Thomas. I appreciate you sharing this. I heard great things about your presentation at the AWFS. And some of the people listening probably saw you there. And that's how I came to find you as a guest. So that's that
Perfect.
feedback loop you were talking about. Just working.
Yeah, 100%. Well,
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I do appreciate it.
For sure. Have a great day, Thomas. We'll talk again.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.